Thank you everyone for coming. This is very early for me, so I apologize for being a little bit sleepy, but today I'm going to talk about transforming Imagineering. How many of you guys, by show of hands, knows what Imagineering is? Just so I know how much I need to explain about it. Okay, so not everyone. So Walt Disney Imagineering is Walt Disney Imagineering. It is the design arm of the Walt Disney Company that is responsible for all of the location-based entertainment that the Walt Disney Company has. This, of course, most popularly is the theme parks, but it is also responsible for all of the hotels and the cruise ships of the Walt Disney Company. My name is Bei Yang. I'm the class of 2007 here at the ETC, and I work at Walt Disney Imagineering. And whenever people kind of ask me what I do there, it's always very difficult for me to explain, because what I generally work on is making Imagineers more powerful and making their everyday lives a little bit better through the use of technology, through the use of tools, and possibly a little bit of process change. And one thing that you'll find common with every Imagineer is that they really love the future and creating the future. In fact, if you take a look at this, everybody know where this is, right? Epcot. I mean, it's literally named Experimental Community of Tomorrow, right? It's part of creating the future. And what's really amazing about it is that Imagineers really love this because it celebrates invention. And in some ways, I've observed that Imagineering is really good for inventing the future, because just by the sheer fact that it builds theme park attractions, it has to have many industries within it. So it's got automotive, it's got visual effects industry just even in it. Of course it has architecture, of course it has construction management, all these things. And it has a little bit of theater production. And of course, some of the more futuristic things like robotics. So I'll just take you through one of our more recent attractions. This just launched in Paris. It is Ratatouille. Of course, very apropos. Who's seen the movie Ratatouille? So Ratatouille, right? You are Remy the mouse, and you are a very famous chef. But this is kind of happening before you became very famous, and this shrinks the guests to the size of a mouse, and you actually ride these mouse-shaped vehicles through a Paris kitchen. And of course, it has all of the comic elements, and you go through it, and there's also these very large projection screens. But in order to build this, if you think about what goes into making one of these, there's, of course, the box that surrounds it, which has to be architecturally sound, which has to be structurally sound. There's all of the electrical work that has to go into it, which is really just making the building. Then you actually have to put stuff in it that people can ride through. So you need the ride track. In this particular case, it's a wireless, it's a wire-guided vehicle. And in fact, there can be 3 vehicles, and they can each be on a separate virtual track. There's not actually a real physical track. But if you think about all of the safety mechanisms that have to go into that, and the control systems that have to go into that, there's also a little software to that. And then there's everything that goes into the box that people look at while you're riding in that vehicle. So you see here, you got all these really nice sets. You've also got some robotics in the back with Remy there. And you've also got visual effects. You've sometimes even got games, right? All of these things really boil down into a theme park attraction, and you need to know all of these things. And of course, it makes for a very interdisciplinary work style, because you just have all of these people trying to share a common language, trying to make a common project, but yet they come from separate industries and come from separate places. And how do you get people to actually do that? So one of the most important things within Imagineering is, of course, this very simple thing, and that is understanding, right? Not just communication, but understanding. We have to understand where each other is coming from, what each other's industry is, and of course, what the heck we're building, the overall vision of the attraction itself. So this is something that we really strive for, and something that's really difficult to do when you have people coming from different disciplines. In fact, I think the Entertainment Technology Center very much represents this by trying to throw many people from different backgrounds into the same team and creating projects. So I want to talk about 2 things today, and these are the case studies I want to try and do. And these are 2 things that I've been personally very involved in within Imagineering, and that is visualization and introspection. And I'll talk a little bit more about these two. This sounds a little bit cryptic, but visualization is really about using the visual language to communicate the vision of what we're trying to design at the very end. So we all know we're visual creatures, right? If you take a look at our brains, we have a visual cortex in the back of our brains. It is one of the largest pieces of our brains. And while we have our other senses, we are inherently visual creatures. And if you take a look at the many industries that are within Imagineering that are related to it, if you take a look at automobile, if you take a look at visual effects, if you look at architecture, theater production, and robotics, each and every single one of these industries individually has made use of computer graphics to aid in their work and to aid in their communication. So let's just take a look at some of these. Obviously, architecture comes to mind. Right? We began with pen and paper drawings, right? Blueprints, architects have to go through this. But if you think about it, we have to learn how to do this. In fact, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the CMU architecture program is still 5 years. Is that true? Anybody know? So it takes that extra year, right, to even learn this visual communication language. So some time progressed, right? We've been using pen and paper for literally centuries. But at some point, computers came into play, and we really started using computers for what they're good at, which was to do these very precise, precision, repeatable things, such as line drawings, and this whole thing of computer-aided drafting, right? CAD came along. And this was really just using the computer at that point as a fancy pen and paper, right? You go through, you're just using the computer, and it's not any different. What really changed for at least the field of architecture is that somewhere around the late 80s and 90s, we started doing 3D modeling. This was something that was very difficult to do with pen and paper, and now all of a sudden, instead of just having a static 2D drawing, we can look at it from different sides. And what was incredible about this is that you required education, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is that you require education to be able to understand blueprints. Yes, I can see a building, yes, I can see an elevation, yes, I can see something, but it's very hard for me to say, okay, I'm standing on front of the building, what does that building look like? So with 3D modeling, we now have the ability to have everybody kind of sit around a computer monitor and be able to see these 3D models. So this particular picture is from the Walt Disney Concert Hall. And this has been touted as one of the first projects, construction projects, that use the process called BIM. Does anybody here know what BIM is? Anybody in construction? Okay, some of you guys are in construction, great. So it stands for Building Information Modeling. And that is really the idea of taking your 3D model. This is a full 3D model, specification level. So don't think in terms of low polygons, don't think in terms of anything with that, in terms of games. These are very dense models, such that I can hand these models to a contractor and they can build off of it. But not only that, I can now tie all of this information to metadata, such as scheduling, sequencing. So when you build these things, you actually have to make sure that the cranes don't get in each other's ways as they move along. You have to make sure that certain pieces are loaded in before things go around them. Because when you're building a building, sequencing is really important. So you can put all of that in there. You can also put division of work, how much things cost, which contractors are responsible for which thing. You can color code it, and so it's very powerful. And this is something that the architecture industry developed entirely independently. And not only has architecture embraced this, but if you take a look at all of the other industries that I mentioned, it is also in those as well. So if you take a look at automobile, CAD was used at some point, and now the entire life cycle of a vehicle is done through computers, through related information on 3D models. If you take a look at theater production, you can visualize light sound. So all of this is really kind of using 3D models for what it's good for. So how have we used this? Of course, we embrace BIM within Imagineering, but we also have all these artists, we have all of these visual effects people that aren't necessarily construction people. So I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive here into Cars Land at Disney's California Adventure. This was a land that we just recently launched for a park in California, and if you are familiar with the movie Cars, it's really creating that little small town that is made there, but at human scale. And you can see those giant canyon rocks in the background. Those are fake. There are not, the Grand Canyon does not exist in Southern California. So traditionally when we do something with theater, we like to start with concept art. Everybody knows concept art, it's really good, right? It's 2D. People understand the look and the feel of what we're going for, right? The fun experience of what we're trying to do. But we extended that, right? What is the BIM equivalent of a creative concept art? And really, that is visualization. So what we can do is now build an entire 3D model, but instead of just doing the 3D model, we can actually time out the entire ride. And what you end up with is a ride visualization. And this is the ride visualization from Radiator Springs Car Fair. So this is the actual large main attraction there, and this is our real previs that we use in there. So we can do things like time out the music. We can also do things like, where do guests find things that are interesting, right? So we also can see exact sight lines of us riding through this. So you can see this is pretty crude, but it gives you an idea of exactly what the story beats are, right? There's a waterfall on our right. That's when the music should swell up. And we can also play with, when people see certain things. So for example, here, we're going into the tunnel for the first time, and we do this gag where they say, oh my God, watch out, there's a truck coming towards you, and we can actually test that out. Do you see that truck in time, right? Now, one of the problems with this is we run through this and we're going around the monitor, but this is really just a representation of the monitor. It's very hard to see certain things like, when Doc comes around and he talks to you, but when you go past him, somebody might be able to look behind the vehicle where they're going, right? How do you test that? On a monitor, you only have about 90 degrees, maybe 120 degrees if you stretch it. So how do you actually go about looking at that? So there's some drawbacks to this, right? You need prior knowledge. There's obviously some model complexity and there's some field of view problems. So we'll go over these one by one. Prior knowledge, talked about this a little bit already, but it takes 5 years to learn architecture. It's really hard to understand a space with just a 2D drawing or even a 3D drawing because it also gets really complex. If you take a look at some of these engineering models, so you saw that original drawing of Walt Disney Concert Hall. If you just take a look at that without any prior knowledge of what we're actually looking at, having a color-coded model is really difficult. Taking this engine apart in 3D is really difficult. And of course, I already said, you have a field of view problem. Well, maybe we can solve this by creating a visualization in which we have a back, a front, and a left, and also kind of like a God camera of where things are. But this is just a really, kind of a stopgap because you need to really experience what it's like to be inside the attraction. So one of the things that we've been really looking at is immersion through virtual reality. And we've been looking at this probably for the last 8 to 9 years. So virtual reality is really nice because it's intuitive. I don't have to have that prior knowledge, right? I can just move around the space very independently and everything's good. I also get a really good sense of scale, distance, and size. I can just look at something and I can just judge it because we all experience the world in real life. We all have a good judgment of scale and size and relative distance as long as you're immersed. Looking at a drawing, that's much harder. And we experience things on a human scale. So we first started this with a head-mounted display probably around 2007. So this is Mr. Lassiter with the Fake Space Wi-Fi bomb reviewing Radiator Springs Car Fair. Now the problem with head-mounted displays at the time was that it was extremely low resolution. But it had a very high field of view because this thing was 150-degree field of view, so you felt immersed in the space. And you can also look around. You can ride the ride, and you can actually see. It's like, man, can I see the thing behind me? But it was also very isolated. So you have an executive in here, you have somebody in here, but they can't communicate to the rest of the team because nobody knows what they're pointing at. And they're like, oh, let's change that thing, right? So we're like, okay, let's create something that's maybe a little bit less immersive but more collaborative. So in the next year, we developed this display wall, 90-degree field of view, very high resolution, made up of multiple projectors. We found it was extremely collaborative. People started talking about it in a very shared way. It was very high resolution, but it had low field of view. Now you kind of lost that ability to look around. So like, oh man, what do we do? How do we solve this? Okay, let's build a virtual reality environment. So this is precisely what we did. This is the digital immersive showroom. There's plenty of YouTube videos about this guy. And this was a cave-like experience in which you got to wear 3D glasses. You got to wear a nice little bowler hat. And that bowler hat tracked exactly where your head was, anywhere in the room, and it would adjust your view such that it was always perfect for you. So if you ever see those chalk drawings on the sidewalk where you look at it from a specific angle and it kind of pops out of the ground. Now imagine that being drawn at 60 frames a second, and that's precisely what this is. It gives you a really good level of immersion, but it also kind of maintained that collaborative nature. This was much higher resolution than the head-mounted display that we used, and it had a very high field of view. This particular one, if you sat in the center and looked forward, it would be 270 degrees, so you can actually turn your head left and right a little bit. But it had a single sweet spot. It was whoever wore the bowler hat was getting the best view. And of course, you could get a little friendly and stand next to each other. Always very fun to get executives to stand next to each other. Which kind of led to our second creation, which is now what we have today, which is now the Digital Immersive Showroom version 2.0. And this is full 360 degrees, so now you can look everywhere, including behind you. This is now 4K resolution on each side. And of course, there's still a single sweet spot. And what we're all really trying to do, and what I really want everybody to take away with, is kind of thinking about how we communicate, and really thinking this is about your body's input-output, right? If you think about our brain, right, locked inside the shell of our human body, it's really about how much can we express to each other, how much can we communicate to each other, and how do we intake that. And if you think about human beings, our bandwidth for getting information out is extremely low. For somebody to be able to do a painting and say, I have an image in my head, I want to communicate that to you, I have to have years of training, right? But our input is extremely high. If we immerse someone, then all of a sudden that amount of understanding is much greater, and that's precisely what we're aiming to do here. And one of the things we've been working at currently now is that not everybody has a digital immersive showroom. That thing is a room. It's actually bigger than this place. How do you actually make that mobile? So one of the things we're looking at is, well, maybe we can use some nice technology. So if you look at Google Street View, it's a panorama viewer, and it gives you a pretty good sense of the space. But maybe you can combine that web application with something like Google Cardboard, and you can have immersion in a box, in your back pocket, or in your purse. And that is precisely what we're doing. And we're also looking at this entire thing that we like to call the display spectrum. Can you go all the way from something that's extremely mobile and have immersion to something that's in the middle for your desktop that is also immersive, all the way to something that's a room? The thing in the center here, for those of you guys that don't know, is a product called the ZSpace. Again, it uses head tracking, and it uses just a monitor in front of you, and you can see in 3D with full head tracking just on your desk in a really nice package, and that's something that we're exploring right now. And of course, when designing all of this stuff, you really want to think of, right, the user is not like me. This is the mantra for all human-computer interaction. So, just to review, it's really about human bandwidth, right? Understanding is important, immersion helps understanding, and you want to make it accessible. So in terms of visualization, that's what we're currently doing in Imagineering. So that kind of concludes visualization. Now let's talk a little bit about introspection. And this is a much more personal story. It's a more personal story for me, and I think it's very appropriate that I'm giving this presentation in the, I believe, what is this room now called? The Randy Pausch Interdisciplinary Studio. Thank you. So one of the things that you really notice in all design firms, and in fact all design studios, is people have reviews on the product, right? You have client reviews, you have stakeholder reviews, you got peer reviews in certain situations. How many of you guys have read Ed Catmull's book, Creative Inc.? Anybody? So in it, he talks about the brain trust, right? And these are people that you know their stuff, and they are able to review and give very honest criticism to the product. And this is ultimately important to any team, to any product. But where is that mechanism for reviewing each other? Where is that magic mirror that I can hold up to myself and say, am I easy to work with? Am I an effective leader? Do I communicate well? And remember, I said that Imagineering is a very interdisciplinary place. How do you actually go about making sure that all of these people with different backgrounds, with different ways of thinking, are able to trust each other? And this is the ultimate important thing for any team, because you have to trust, because we can give all of the visualizations in the world, but if you're unable to trust each other, you still won't be able to get your project done. So one of the things that Randy said in his lecture, How to Achieve Your Childhood Dreams, right? He said you can actually tell if a project was, he particularly said, you can tell if a world, this building virtual world, was going to be good by the body language of the team. If the teams are sitting close together, was going to be good if they were kind of sitting far away, and maybe like not really paying attention to each other, maybe it wasn't going to be so good. So I, of course, had a life-changing experience here at the Entertainment Technology Center, and I also had a life-changing experience when I took building virtual worlds for the first time as a sophomore in undergrad. And I don't really think I need to introduce him to that much, but does everybody here in this room know who Randy Pausch was? Do I need to show our hands? Okay. So I had the great privilege of having him as my professor. And he created this thing called Building Virtual Worlds, right? It was a class in which students got randomly put into a group, and they had to make what is effectively a video game in a very high-stress environment because the deadlines were so tight. And they really had to work together as a team. But what was really amazing about this course was at the end of every session, you had an anonymous feedback. You had to rank your peers in terms of creative contribution, and they're easy to work with. You can't have any ties. You always said you can't have any ties. Flip a coin if you have a tie. And the really cool part was that you had 3 good things, no blanks, that you should definitely keep, and 3 things that you need to improve on, no blanks. And in the end, you had this amazing class rank in terms of your creative contribution and you're used to work with, and a list of 60 great things and 60 not so great things. And these were very unfiltered feedback from your peers. And all of a sudden, you can now start seeing the forests from the trees. And a story that Randy really doesn't share that much, but he shared to this class, was that he got this from one of his professors, right? This is Andy Van Dam, and he's also a computer graphics pioneer. And in fact, it's rumored that Andy from Toy Story is named after the guy. And Randy had a life-altering experience, right? At some point, Andy pulled him aside, as the way that Randy tells it, and he said to him, Randy, it's such a shame that people perceive you as so arrogant because it's going to limit what you're going to accomplish in life. And to him, this was a pivotal moment. He's like, wow, somebody actually cares enough about me to tell me about this. And it was his wish to share this experience with Building Virtual Worlds. And I had the pleasure and privilege of taking that course. And of course, I had my peer evaluations. Now, what was interesting about this is I had this kind of life-altering experience, and I got my peer evaluations back, and 3 great things: very talented, good creative vision, and good drive to get things done. I was like, great. And then, of course, kind of came the thing this one is great. It's number 1, your ego. Number 2, not taking things seriously enough, wasting things that are not a huge priority, your priorities in general. I love that one. This is one of my favorites. Like they're retarded. And by the way, I have these hanging on my wall in my office. Don't scoff at ideas during brainstorming, and of course, know when to be pushy. So of course I got these back, and I was like, man, this is very upsetting, right? Like these are attacking my character traits. What's going to happen? But after a week, I calmed down a little bit. And I was like, these are actually true, and this is why I hang them up on my office. And I was arrogant, and I had to learn a great deal, and this is something that I struggle with every day, because it's something that's inherent in my personality. But one of the things that kind of came out of this, through many years, is that I started to trust my peers. And what's really interesting is that around 3 years ago, right, I got married, and I had the privilege of having my closest friends there. So that first peer evaluation is actually from this person, and that second peer evaluation is from this person. And I'm not going to say that having peer reviews is going to cause you to fall in love and be best friends with somebody, but it does start building up trust, and that's precisely what I wanted to bring to Imagineering, which is why we built this product called WDI 360 there, and it's almost the exact same format. So first, it gives you several questions to set the mood, to give those free responses, and then, of course, it's the free responses, and you'll see this is very similar, and it is 3 things that you can improve on, and 3 things that you shouldn't change. And of course, we have our own rules, right? Number 1, absolutely voluntary. This is a company-wide initiative. You don't want to make this about tied to your, you don't want to tie this to your pay. You don't want to tie this to your actual yearly reviews. This is something that's absolutely voluntary. no one else has access to those reviews except for you. If you want to share it with your peers, if you want to share it with your supervisor, go right ahead. But it is absolutely voluntary. There is a reviewer minimum to make sure that anonymity is kept even for the reviewers. And of course, some people don't reply all the time, so that's why we give them 8 minimum, but we actually allow you to pull the report after 6, but after the 6, the remaining people no longer can pull the report. And in some ways, this has kind of come full circle. Because, Randy really kind of said that he really enjoyed the interdisciplinary nature of Walt Disney Imagineering when he did a sabbatical there. So that's what led him to create Building Virtual Worlds. With Building Virtual Worlds, he created a system that allowed students going through that in interdisciplinary ways to review each other, and somehow that has now percolated back to Imagineering. So has this been successful? So to date, this has only been around for about a year. It's had 450 reviews. There's about 3,000 Imagineers right now, so this is actually pretty good coverage for just a year. And remember, it's absolutely voluntary. There's been 3,000 reviewers that's been reviewing these people, and there's 18,000 free responses that's been given. So in terms of what this is all about, right? It's all about having a team and having understanding. It really is about trust. And frank feedback builds trust. Again, not saying it's going to lead to wedding bells, but it will lead to trust. And voluntary does work. We're getting pretty good coverage with this. So in review, right, teams need to understand the vision. Immersion helps that understanding, and trust is very much needed for communication. And I want to end on something which is anybody can kind of do this, right? Yes, this took kind of years to create in terms of what we did with visualization, in terms of what we did with severe introspection, but starting something anywhere, and these things are very cliche, and these things are talked about in every single startup book, in every single lecture, but I just want to hit on them one more time. Number one, you really have to care about the things, because these are very long roads, and if you don't care about them, you're not going to be able to face the challenges that's going to come upon you. Start small, right? Start at somewhere small. We started with the head-mounted display. Now, granted, that is much smaller than actually building the digital immersive showroom that we ultimately ended up on, but it proved the point. And of course, tenacity. If you take a look at how long it took visualization really kind of to catch on, immersive visualization, it started in 2008, and it's 2015 now, and we're just 4 iterations in, and we're still going. So, lastly, right, when people kind of ask me, they're like, why do you keep doing this? Like, why not just like do the status quo? And one of my friends, also an ETCer, once said to me, to treat every job like it's your last, because it may be, right? Treat every job such that you know you're going to be there for a while, thus you have no choice than to make it your perfect place. So try to make it perfect. And that is about transforming Imagineering. Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions? We have 2 minutes.
With the Oculus and all the talk now about all these other, like the HoloLens and things like that, is there other alternatives that you've been thinking about, where like everybody could put on a HoloLens, for instance, and all walk around the same room and look at things, and your perspective from your viewpoint would be correct no matter where you were in the room?
So you're talking about multi-user visualization platforms. Yeah, we've definitely looked at that. So things that we have looked at, multiple head-mounted displays, works, but remember I talked about the bandwidth of human communication. Turns out empathy, which is very important in making critical decisions, is communicated in the face quite a lot. So having anything on your face is not a deal breaker, but something that you lose from putting something on your face. We also have looked at multi-viewpoint cave displays, so you can have 2 bowler hats or 3 bowler hats, and you just have to drive the projectors at a much faster rate and also wear some more specialized glasses. Again, something we're looking at. And also, maybe we can get to a point where we can project better telepresence, because one of the great things about kind of immersion through kind of virtual technologies like this is I don't actually have to be in the same physical location. So maybe we can have digital immersive showrooms in the future that not only show you the virtual world, but also has a representation of the real person on the other side of the phone line. So yes, you're absolutely right. Having collaborative environments, things like the HoloLens, things like the Oculus, I think very much drive this and gives us the ability to do this, and we're all really excited about the future.
Have you considered bringing these things together and creating an immersive experience about what it's like to work with you?
Ask me that question one more time.
Have you considered bringing immersion or visualization and introspection together and creating a more immersive experience about what it's like for one colleague to work with another?
That's a really interesting idea. We've thrown it around a little bit, but unfortunately we haven't done anything. We often kind of joke around of saying, you know, we can really use the skills that we have with theater and theatrical production to have understanding of what other disciplines. Like, could we do like role playing, improv, in which we can do this? So yes, we've kind of batted it around, but we haven't done anything official. All right, I think that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Thank you very much, guys.